In this course, we are trying to give some introduction about project risk. At the very beginning, we will make kind of clarification for the interface between what is project management and what is project risk management. Project management basically is based on some requirements, and those requirements usually are what are the scope of work that we have within the project, and basically the cost of the project, the duration of the project, and what are the functions and the requirements with respect of quality that's required for the different items that we have in the project. For those four items, scope of work, cost, time, and quality, we are always at risk. The risk depends on the type of the project. But what is meant by risk? Risk is the deviation from those requirements, from the scope, cost, time, and quality. Because project is unique, usually we have risk. For any new project, we must have some risk. That risk might be high, might be medium, might be low, but for any project, the risk is always there. In order to satisfy those requirements that we have here in this triangle, we always have to consider the requirements for procurements, the requirements for communication with the stakeholders that we have in the projects team and other stakeholders. We have to consider the human resource who are supporting the project and who are working within the management team and so on. And for sure, we have to consider the stakeholders who are affecting or affected by the project requirements and the project deliverables. For this slide, we can see that what are the parameters and what are the areas that affect the success of the project. At the very beginning and at the top of those items, we can see communication. Communication, as per that referendum, we have kind of 43% of the people participating in this referendum assume that communication is the prime parameter that affect the success or the failure of the project. Number two, after communication, we can find the risk. At 38% of the people participating in this questionnaire, assuming that risk is one of the prime parameters that's affecting the success and the failure of the project. After that, we can see human resource, the integration between the different items that we have in the project, procurement management, and cost comes at the sixth position. From my perspective, I think cost is much more than 15%. However, that's the opinion of the people participated in that question. When we are talking about a project, we have to make sure what is meant by a project. Project is always unique. Even if we are talking about those twins, we are in front of two people. We are not on the identical people. We have another child with different names, with some different hairs that we can see, some different shape of the nose, and so on. But by the end, we have different projects as we have those two infants that in front of us. The same if we are talking about twins of buildings like those villas, for example, we can see some differences like the facade of the villa, the directions of the villa, the people who are constructing the villas, and so on. So any project that we have is usually different from any other project. That difference might consist of 90% of the items or the components of the project might consist of 5%, 1%, but we never have two identical projects. We always have some different projects from any other project that we got. Creates a unique product or service or results. What's project management? Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. Basically, whenever we are talking about project management, we are talking how to make the best use of the resources that we have. Whenever we are talking about resources, we are talking about our capabilities, our material resources that we have, the available human resource that we got in the project and supporting the project. We are talking about the assets that we have in our organization. We are talking about the environment that we are implementing the project within. So how to make the best use. We are always looking for the best use of the resources that we have or the available resources to find out what is the ultimate requirements and to satisfy the ultimate requirements that we have in the project. So simply project management is how to control and make use of the resources that you have in order to satisfy the needs and the requirements of that project. So whenever we are talking about project risk management, in this case, we are talking about deviation from the requirements of the project in general. So risk is the deviation between the requirements and the achievements of the requirements. So that deviation might be positive, might be negative. So usually whenever we are talking about risk, we consider the negative side. In most of the cases, practically, from practical point of view, the risks to be considered are the negative risks that we have. Sometimes, or actually rarely, we have to consider the positive risk. When you are talking about business, in many cases, we might face the positive risk. But when we are talking about construction projects, usually we are talking about most of the cases, we are talking about negative risks, and maybe 10% or less than 10% we are considering the positive risks. When we are talking about risk management, it includes the processes of conducting risk management, planning, identification, analysis, response planning, and controlling risk on a project. This is the literal definition of the project risk management. But again, what is risk? Risk is related to the requirements, the deviation from the plan that we have for the requirements, including scope, cost, quality, and time. Any deviation from the plan that we have for any of those four components that might be considered as risk. Whenever we are talking about risk, we are talking about something, or we are talking about event that might happen, might occur in the future. If we are talking about something that happened in the past, so it is not a risk. Risk is always a probable event that might happen in the future. Take care. Whenever you are talking about risk, well, you are talking about the future. And you are talking about event that will affect or might affect the requirements or the basic requirements of the project. And our lives actually is full of risks that we have. Even if I'm speaking right now, I have a lot of risks to be considered. I have to consider my word, I have to consider my laptop, I have to consider the electricity. So I have to consider many things that any deviation from the plan that I have with those items that will affect the presentation that I have. So that might be minor risks. But by the end, the application of the definition of the risks. When we are talking about big projects like construction projects with millions of pounds or millions of dollars, in this regard, we have to consider at the same level of deviation. So we have to consider risks that might impact the project for many days or many weeks, or that will impact the project for thousands of dollars or thousands of pounds or more, and so on. So we don't have to consider all the risks that we have in the project. It depends on the scale of the project, depends on the type of the project, depends on the experience that we have as project management team for the project. This is simply the common risk that we have, the threats. Whenever we are talking about risk, as we mentioned, we have negative risks, we have positive risks. Threats and opportunities. Threats are the negative risks, and opportunities are the positive risks. And most probably, the threats that we are facing in most of the project, since we are not business people, We are construction people, but we have to consider the business as well in parallel with considering the construction. Because if there is no business, there is no construction. Construction is one type of the business that we have to consider. Why do we have to implement project management? The objectives are to increase the likelihood and impact of positive events or positive risks or potential risks, and to decrease the likelihood and impact of negative events or risks or potential risks that we have in the project. In order to focus, as I have just mentioned, we have to consider the big risks that we have in the project, the big risks with positive impact or the big risks with negative impacts. So simply, we can consider risk management as how to enhance opportunities that we have in the project and how to reduce threats that we have in the project. This is one of the easier and the most definitions that I like actually for what is meant by project risk management. Stakeholders. Stakeholders are very important parameter that we have in risk management. We have also, as we mentioned for the risk, there are positive risks and there are some negative risks, or vice versa. The stakeholders might be positive stakeholders and might be negative stakeholders. Positive stakeholders for sure, those who are supporting the project, those who are contributing to the success of the project. And negative stakeholders, those who are putting more burden on the project, who are putting more burden on the team of the management of the project, and so on. Actually, the most important negative stakeholders that we usually have in the project are the competitors that we have. The competitors for the contractor, the competitors for the owner, the competitor for the user, the competitor for the suppliers, because those people who are the positive stakeholders usually have competitors, and those competitors put some burden as work, as effort. But if you are talking about quality and money, that's positive risk, because whenever you have competitor, you'll try to enhance your quality, you are trying to reduce their cost, and that's usually in favor of the owner, but it is not in favor of those stakeholders who are the contractor or the supplier or the subcontractors and so on. So always we have different interests between the owner and between some other stakeholders, not all other stakeholders, but by the end, we are looking for the success of the project, not only to the benefit of the owner or the benefit of the contractor or the benefit of the suppliers. We are looking for the success and the benefit of the project itself. If the project is successful, that's actually will be a win-win situation for all the parties that we have, for the owner, for the contractor, for the supplier, and for sure for the engineer as well. This is the common flow of the work or the money within a typical project. At the very beginning, we have little flow of the project and effort. In the middle phase of the project, we have a lot of cost to be spent and a lot of effort to be spent. And by the end, we have little effort to be spent in the case of the commissioning and finalizing the project. That might be typical for most of the types of the project, and even for construction projects, we have similar profile. What is the importance of that? Actually, whenever we are talking about this, if we have a lot of work, we have a lot of risk. If we have little work, we have a little of risks to be facing. That's why we have to consider this diagram. So at the execution phase, usually we have a lot of risks, potential risk to be faced or might be faced. So we have to be aware at this phase because many of the risks are happening in the execution phase. But if we are talking about planning for the risk, which is most of the effort that we are preparing and spending time and effort at the very beginning, we have to consider at the very beginning, because most of the risks during the whole life cycle of the project need to be planned at the very beginning of the project.